I am Jolene, 31 years old, and I always believed family meant unconditional love. My grandfather William raised me after Mom died, teaching me values no money could buy. My father Thomas was different, always eyeing Grandpa's fortune from a distance. At the funeral, when Dad inherited $56 million, he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You are useless to me now." What he did not know about the will would change everything in just 24 hours. If you are watching this, drop a comment telling me where you are viewing from. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how my grandfather outsmarted my greedy father from beyond the grave. The earliest memory I have of my mother is her gentle hands brushing my hair before bed. Sarah was her name, and she had the most beautiful auburn hair that would catch the sunlight just right. I was only 8 years old when cancer took her away from us. The hospital stays grew longer. Her once vibrant face grew paler. And then one day, my father Thomas told me with dry eyes that she was gone. There were no tears from him, just a clinical explanation that Mommy was not coming home. My grandfather William stepped in immediately while my father buried himself in work and barely acknowledged my existence. Grandpa William became my rock. He moved me into his spacious New England home with its creaking wooden floors and walls filled with books. "Your mother loved this room when she was your age," he told me, as he set up my bedroom with a canopy bed that made me feel like a princess despite my grief. William Stewart was a self-made businessman who built a construction empire from scratch. He came from nothing, working his way through the college with calloused hands and determination. By the time I came to live with him, his company Stewart Construction was worth millions. But you would never know it from his humble demeanor. He drove the same Buick for 15 years and taught me that wealth is what you build inside, not what you flaunt outside. My father Thomas was the opposite. As William's only son, he grew up expecting the family fortune. He worked at the company, but lacked my grandfather's vision and connection with people. The employees respected William, but merely tolerated Thomas. I would overhear my grandfather on the phone saying, "Thomas has book smarts, but no heart for the business." This created a constant tension I could feel even as a child. Throughout my childhood, I made countless attempts to connect with my father. Every school play, I would scan the audience for his face. Most times, the seat remained empty. When he did show up, he would leave immediately after always, with an excuse about an important meeting. I learned to stop expecting him, and instead cherish my grandfather's consistent presence. William never missed a single event, always sitting in the front row with his camera ready, and pride beaming across his face. When it came time for college, I chose business administration, hoping it might finally create a bond with my father. "See, Dad, I am following in your footsteps," I told him excitedly when I got accepted to the same university he attended. His response was lukewarm at best. "Business is sensible. It will give you financial security. No congratulations, no pride, just practical assessment." My grandfather, however, took me out to celebrate. "Education is never wasted," he told me over dinner at my favorite restaurant. "But remember, Jolene, the most important business skill is understanding people, not just numbers." He gave me a leather-bound journal that night. Inside the cover, he had written to see the true measure of a person. Watch how they treat others when they think no one is looking. As I grew older, the contrast between these two men in my life became more apparent. Thomas would visit William's house primarily when business matters needed discussion. During these visits, he would acknowledge me with a nod or ask perfunctory questions about my studies. There was never genuine interest in my answers. His eyes would often drift to the antiques and artwork in my grandfather's home, mentally cataloging their value. William and I developed special traditions together. Sunday mornings were sacred, spent making Belgian waffles from his mother's recipe and discussing everything from politics to philosophy. He would challenge my thinking with questions rather than imposing his views. "A mind needs to be exercised just like a muscle," he would say. These conversations shaped me more than any formal education. When I graduated with honors, William sat proudly in the audience, while Thomas claimed a business emergency kept him away. That night, my grandfather handed me a small box containing my grandmother's sapphire ring. "Your mother wore this on her graduation day, too." He said, "Strong women have worn this ring for generations. Now it is your turn." As the years passed, William's health began to decline. At 78, his once strong frame became frailer. and the doctors diagnosed him with congestive heart failure. Without hesitation, I moved back into my childhood home to care for him. My marketing job could be done remotely, and nothing was more important than being there for the man who had always been there for me. Suddenly, Thomas began appearing more frequently on his visits. Once rare became weekly occurrences. He would bring expensive wines and sit with William discussing the business and reminiscing about the past in a way I had never witnessed before. To an outsider, it might have looked like a son reconnecting with his aging father, but I noticed how his questions always circled back to the company, the will, and the estate planning. William noticed too. One evening after Thomas left, my grandfather reached for my hand. "People show you who they are, Jolene. It is not your job to make excuses for them." I wanted to believe Thomas was finally developing genuine concern for his father. But deep down, I recognized the pattern of behavior that had defined him throughout my life. The closer William came to the end, the more attentive Thomas became to the potential beginning of his inheritance. The doctor's words hit like a physical blow. 6 months, maybe less. We were sitting in the sterile consultation room when Dr. Patel delivered the news that William's heart was failing rapidly. My grandfather received the prognosis with the same dignity that characterized his entire life. "Well then," he said calmly, "we had better make the most of the time we have left." That same day, I packed up my apartment and moved permanently into my childhood bedroom. My marketing clients were understanding when I explained I needed to reduce my workload to care for my grandfather. Some projects I passed to colleagues, keeping only the ones I could manage between caregiving responsibilities. Money became tighter, but that was the least of my concerns. William's condition required constant attention. I learned to administer his medications, monitor his oxygen levels, and recognize the subtle signs that indicated good days from bad. The home health nurse Lydia came 3 times a week, but the bulk of the care fell to me. I set up a small desk in the corner of the living room so I could work while keeping him company. Despite his weakening body, William's mind remained sharp as ever. Our conversations deepened during this period, as if the approaching end of his life had removed all filters. "I have no regrets about the business," he told me. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the bay windows, "but I do regret the distance with Thomas. I wonder if I pushed him too hard or not hard enough." I would read to him from his favorite books when he was too tired to hold them himself. Hemingway, Steinbeck, and biographies of historical figures filled our evenings. Sometimes he would stop me mid-paragraph to share a memory or insight the passage had triggered. "Life is a collection of stories, Jolene," he said once. "Make sure yours is worth telling." On good days, we would sit in the garden he had tended for decades. The roses were his pride, each variety selected and cultivated with patience. "Everything worthwhile takes time," he explained, as he instructed me on proper pruning techniques from his wheelchair. "Remember that with people, too. The best ones reveal their beauty slowly during these months." Thomas began visiting twice weekly, sometimes bringing expensive takeout food that William could barely eat with his diminished appetite. I noticed how my father would casually bring up business matters during these visits. "The Jefferson contract is almost finalized," he would say. "The profit margins look excellent for the next 5 years." William would listen politely, but I caught the knowing glance he would sometimes throw my way. After one such visit, he asked me to help him to his study. Once the door closed, he said, "I need you to call Harold Jenkins. It is time to review some paperwork." Harold had been William's attorney for over 40 years. A friendship as much as a professional relationship. The elderly lawyer arrived the next day, bringing with him a briefcase full of documents. They spent 3 hours behind closed doors, while I anxiously waited outside, respecting their privacy despite my curiosity. When Harold emerged, he patted my shoulder gently. "Your grandfather is a wise man, Jolene always has been." He declined my offer of tea, saying he had everything he needed. For now, but would be in touch soon. That night, William seemed more at peace. "Promise me something," he said, as I adjusted his pillows before bed. "Promise you will live according to your own values, not anyone else's expectations." "I promise," I whispered, fighting back tears. "And one more thing?" He added, his voice suddenly stronger. "Do not worry about your future. I have made sure you will be taken care of." I assumed he meant emotionally or spiritually, never imagining the literal interpretation those words would later take. As William's condition deteriorated, Thomas's visits became even more frequent. He began bringing company documents for William to review, despite the doctor's warnings about unnecessary stress. "Dad needs to stay connected to what he built," Thomas insisted. When I objected, I noticed how he would study William's medicine schedule, asking detailed questions about the progression of the disease. During this period, William insisted on more private meetings with Harold. Sometimes they would speak in hushed tones that fell silent when I entered the room. Once I overheard William saying firmly, "He needs to learn, this is the only way." The final week arrived more suddenly than the doctors predicted. William became bedridden, his breathing labored despite the oxygen. I barely left his side sleeping on a cot next to his bed. Thomas visited daily, now his concern seemingly genuine as the inevitable approached. On the last night, during a rare moment when Thomas had stepped out to take a call, William beckoned me closer. His voice was barely audible. "Remember who you are, Jolene. Blood does not always make family." He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "The truth has a way of revealing itself." William Stewart passed peacefully in his sleep at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October. I was holding his hand, telling him about the sunrise that would soon appear when I realized his chest had stopped rising. A profound silence filled the room, broken only by my quiet sobs. I called the hospice nurse first, then Thomas. My father answered groggily, but his voice sharpened immediately when I delivered the news. "I will be right there," he said. "Do not call anyone else yet." Thomas arrived dressed in a suit despite the early hour. After the doctor confirmed the death and left, my father did something that struck me as bizarre. Before even acknowledging my grief, he began opening desk drawers and checking bookshelves. "What are you doing?" I asked through tears. "Looking for the will," he replied matter-of-factly. Dad mentioned keeping a copy at home. As I sat shell-shocked by my grandfather's bed, Thomas made calls to the company board members and the funeral home, taking charge with an efficiency that seemed inappropriate given the circumstances. There was no space for grief in his actions, only business to be handled. In that moment, I felt more alone than I ever had before. The morning of William's funeral arrived with appropriately somber skies. Gray clouds hung low, threatening rain that never quite materialized. Much like the tears my father never quite shed. Stewart Construction closed for the day, out of respect, and the funeral home parking lot overflowed with cars. William had touched countless lives from employees. He had given second chances to clients who became friends over decades of business dealings. I wore the simple black dress my grandfather had complimented years before. "Elegance does not shout," he had told me then. Thomas arrived with his assistant in tow, a young man frantically taking notes about who attended and which business connections were present. The church filled beyond capacity. People stood along the walls and spilled out into the foyer. I sat in the front row, a box of tissues clutched in my trembling hands. Thomas sat beside me, checking his watch periodically, as if he had a more important appointment to follow. When it came time for the eulogies, Thomas spoke first. His speech was polished and professional, focusing mainly on William's business acumen and company legacy. He used phrases like financial stewardship and market leadership that felt hollow in the sacred space. There was no mention of William as a father or grandfather, no personal anecdotes that revealed the man behind the success. When my turn came, my legs felt wooden as I approached the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. I took a deep breath and began speaking from my heart. My grandfather measured wealth not in dollars, but in moments, I said. He taught me that a person's true legacy is the love they leave behind. I shared stories of Sunday waffles, life lessons in the garden, and the quiet strength he showed in his final days. Throughout the service, I noticed an elderly gentleman I did not immediately recognize. He sat near the back. His silver hair neatly combed his posture, respectful, but somehow vigilant. Only when he approached me afterward did I realize it was Harold Jenkins Williams' attorney. Though we had met during my grandfather's illness, his appearance had changed somewhat, making him initially unfamiliar. "A beautiful service," Harold said, clasping my hand warmly. "William would have appreciated your words, especially Jolene." He handed me his card. "There will be a reading of the will tomorrow at 2 p.m. at William's home. Please be punctual." Thomas overheard this exchange and immediately inserted himself into the conversation. "I have cleared my schedule completely," he told Harold. "Will the company transfer papers be ready as well?" Harold's expression remained neutral. "All relevant documents will be presented tomorrow." Mr. Stewart, his formality with my father contrasted sharply with the warmth he had shown me. The reception following the funeral was held at William's home. Our home. Caterers had transformed the living room into an elegant but subdued gathering space. I moved through the crowd in a daze, accepting condolences and sharing brief memories of my grandfather with guests. Thomas, meanwhile, huddled in corners with business associates, their conversations seemingly inappropriate for the occasion. Several times I overheard phrases like restructuring opportunity and leadership transition. My father appeared to be conducting business meetings under the guise of mourning. By evening, the house had emptied except for Thomas and me. I began cleaning up despite the caterer's assurances they would return in the morning to finish the activity. Gave my hands purpose while my heart felt hello. "You should pack your things tonight," Thomas said abruptly as I collected empty glasses from the study. I froze. "What do you mean after the will reading tomorrow? I will be moving in. This house has always been meant for the company CEO." His tone was matter of fact, as if discussing a simple logistical matter rather than uprooting my life. "But this is my home," I protested. "I have lived here since I was 8. As a guest of my father, Thomas corrected coldly. "The property belongs to the estate, which will transfer to me as the heir. You will need to find your own place." Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by memories, trying to process not only my grief, but the shocking callousness of my father's behavior. By morning, my eyes were swollen from crying, but I forced myself to appear composed for the will. Reading at precisely 2 p.m., the designated parties gathered in William's study. Thomas sat behind the desk, already a symbolic claiming of territory that did not go unnoticed by Harold, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Several company executives attended, along with the family financial advisor and myself. Harold placed his briefcase on the desk and removed a thick document. "I will now read the last will and testament of William Edward Stewart," he announced formally. The room fell silent. The initial provisions were standard concerning funeral arrangements and small bequests to loyal staff. Thomas fidgeted impatiently until Harold reached the main inheritance clause to my son, Thomas William Stewart. "I leave Stewart Construction Company and all its holdings valued at approximately $56 million. Along with the family home and its contents, Thomas's face transformed instantly. The impatience vanished, replaced by triumphant satisfaction. He straightened in his chair, already carrying himself differently as the new multimillionaire he had become. The executives murmured congratulations. While shooting concerned glances my way, I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. While I had never expected a large inheritance, the complete absence of my name so far felt like a final abandonment. Had my grandfather forgotten me after all? Harold continued reading, detailing various charitable donations and business transitions. The meeting concluded, and people began gathering their things to leave. Thomas remained seated, now openly smiling as the room cleared. I approached Harold. "Is that everything I asked quietly, trying to keep my voice steady?" Before Harold could answer, Thomas interjected. "You heard it all, Jolene. The company and estate come to me." He stood and buttoned his suit jacket. "I will give you until tomorrow to remove your belongings. I have contractors coming to begin renovations on Monday." Harold watched this exchange with an unreadable expression. "Mr. Stewart, perhaps you would like to review the complete document at your leisure," he suggested, offering Thomas the thick folder. "I caught the important parts," Thomas replied dismissively. "Have your office send the summary." He turned to me. "As for you, your services as caretaker are no longer required. You were only useful while my father needed looking after. You are useless now." The cruelty of his words stole my breath. Years of seeking this man's approval crashed down around me as I finally saw him completely unmasked. This was who my father truly was. Someone who could discard his only child without a moment's hesitation, once she no longer served a purpose. As the others filed out, Thomas remained to take a phone call. I stood in the doorway of the study, that had been my grandfather's sanctuary, watching my father place his feet on the antique desk with casual disregard for its history or value. His voice carried as he spoke. "Yes, I got everything." The old man finally came through. In that moment, something broke inside me, a final thread of hope that there might be some redemption for our relationship. I turned away, tears blurring my vision, and began the painful process of deciding which pieces of my life I could fit into a suitcase by morning. The next morning dawned with painful clarity. I had spent the night sorting through 23 years of memories, trying to determine what I could take and what I would have to leave behind. Each item held a story, a connection to the grandfather who had raised me. The antique music box he had given me for my 16th birthday. The collection of seashells we had gathered during summer trips to Cape Cod. The hand-knit Afghans my grandmother had made before I was born. I had just placed the last of these treasures into my second suitcase when I heard unfamiliar voices downstairs. Following the sounds, I discovered 2 uniformed security guards in the foyer. Speaking with Thomas, "There you are," my father said when he noticed me on the stairs. "These gentlemen will be overseeing the property transition. They will escort you out when you are ready." His tone was businesslike, as if addressing a trespasser rather than his daughter. "You hired security to remove me from my home?" I asked, disbelief coloring my voice. "A standard precaution during ownership transitions," he replied smoothly. Nothing personal, but it was personal. Everything about this situation was deeply, painfully personal. I noticed a locksmith working on the front door. "You are changing the locks already," my voice cracked, despite my efforts to remain composed. "Naturally, the property contains valuable assets." Thomas checked his watch impatiently. "How much longer do you need? I have meetings this afternoon." The security guards looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight and avoiding eye contact. They were simply doing their job, but the humanity in them recognized the cruelty unfolding before them. "I will need help with these," I said, gesturing to my suitcases. One of the guards immediately moved to assist, relief evident in his expression at having a concrete task. As we descended the stairs, memories flooded through me with each step. This banister I had slid down as a child despite William's gentle reprimands. The wall where pencil marks tracked my growth through the years. The reading nook in the corner where my grandfather and I had spent countless hours sharing books and ideas. Thomas stood by the door, keys in hand, clearly eager to take full possession of his prize. As the guard loaded my suitcases into my modest Honda, I took one last look around the entrance hall. The crystal chandelier caught the morning light, scattering rainbows across the hardwood floors. How many times had my grandfather pointed out those rainbow patterns to delight me as a child? "Is that everything?" Thomas asked, his impatience barely concealed. I nodded, unable to speak through the tightness in my throat. "Good. The company lawyers will contact you if there are any remaining formalities." He extended his hand mechanically, as if concluding a business meeting. I stared at the offered hand, but did not take it. Some pretenses were too hollow to maintain. Without a word, I walked past him and out the door of the only real home I had ever known. The security guard who had carried my bags gave me a sympathetic nod. "I'm sorry, miss," he said quietly, out of Thomas's earshot. The drive to the lakeside inn was a blur of tears and disbelief. I had chosen the modestly priced hotel because it offered weekly rates, and I needed time to figure out my next steps. My savings would not last long, especially with my reduced income. During the months I had cared for William, the hotel room was clean but impersonal, its beige walls and generic artwork. A stark contrast to the character-filled home I had just left. I placed my grandmother's Afghan on the bed, a small attempt to make the space feel less foreign. Then I sat by the window and finally allowed myself to fully break down. Grief came in waves. Not just for William now, but for the father I had never truly had, and the security I had lost in one cruel stroke. The sky darkened outside as I sat motionless, memories playing like a film reel behind my eyes. By the time I roused myself to unpack the essentials, it was past midnight. Sleep refused to come. I tossed in the unfamiliar bed, my mind racing with questions and fears. What would I do now? Where would I live long term? How could my own father be so callous? Had my grandfather really left me nothing, not even a message of goodbye? Morning arrived with harsh fluorescent light and the distant sounds of housekeeping carts in the hallway. I forced myself to shower and change, going through the motions of normalcy, while feeling anything but normal inside. My phone showed several missed calls from friends who had attended the funeral, but I could not bear to explain my situation yet. Instead, I called Angela, my closest friend since college, who lived in a nearby town. "Can I come stay with you for a few days?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Just until I figure things out." "Of course," she replied without hesitation. "What happened?" "I will explain when I see you." I promised, knowing the full story would require face-to-face conversation. After arranging to move to Angela's spare room that evening, I began researching apartment rentals in the area. The prices shocked me far higher than I had anticipated. My marketing business had suffered during the months of caregiving and rebuilding. My client base would take time. The future stretched before me, uncertain and intimidating. My phone rang just after noon, displaying an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a telemarketer, but some instinct prompted me to answer. "Jolene Stewart," a formal voice inquired. "Yes, this is she. This is Patricia from Harold Jenkins' law office. Mr. Jenkins would like to meet with you this afternoon if you are available." My heart skipped. "Did he say what about, only that it concerns your grandfather's estate and is of urgent importance?" We arranged a 3:00 appointment. I spent the intervening hours speculating about the purpose of the meeting. Perhaps there was a small bequest after all, something Harold had not mentioned during the formal reading. Or maybe there were personal items William had specifically designated for me. The law office was located in a historic building downtown, its interior, a study in old-world elegance. Dark wood paneling lined the walls, and leather-bound law books filled built-in shelves. I gave my name to the receptionist and was immediately shown to Harold's private office. The elderly attorney rose to greet me, his expression warmer than the professional demeanor he had maintained during the whistle reading. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Jolene," he said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from his desk. "I expect you have had a difficult 24 hours. The simple acknowledgement of my pain broke something loose inside me. To my embarrassment, tears welled in my eyes. "Yes, I managed. Thomas had security escort me out this morning." Harold's eyebrows shot up. "Did he indeed?" He reached for a leather portfolio on his desk. "That is very interesting timing." "What do you mean?" A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Did your father even read the complete will?" Harold's question hung in the air between us. I stared at him, confusion momentarily replacing my grief. The complete will. I was there for the reading. Thomas inherited everything: the company, the house, all $56 million worth of assets. The elderly lawyer leaned back in his chair, fingers stapled beneath his chin. Yes, the primary provisions were read aloud as is customary. But did Thomas bother to review the complete document afterward, the conditions and codicil? He told Harold to send a summary to his office, I recalled. He said he caught the important parts. A chuckle escaped Harold's lips. "There is the Thomas Stewart I have known for 30 years, always too impatient for details." He opened the leather portfolio and removed a thick document bound in blue. "Your grandfather anticipated this exact behavior." My heartbeat quickened. "What do you mean William and I spent considerable time crafting this will, particularly over the last year as his health declined?" Harold put on his reading glasses and flipped to a marked page. "The inheritance does indeed go to Thomas, but with very specific conditions attached." He cleared his throat and began to read the bequest to my son Thomas. "William Stewart is contingent upon his agreement to provide lifetime support for my granddaughter Jolene. Sarah Stewart, including, but not limited to, housing at the family residence, a monthly allowance of $10,000 for living expenses and coverage of all educational and healthcare costs she may incur." My mouth fell open. Harold continued reading. Should Thomas fail to fulfill these obligations at any time, or should he act in a manner that causes significant distress or hardship to Jolene, the entirety of the estate, including Stewart Construction and all associated holdings, shall immediately transfer to Jolene Sarah Stewart. The room seemed to spin around me, but he already violated that condition. He threw me out this morning. Harold's eyes twinkled. Precisely. And in doing so, less than 24 hours after the will reading, he has defaulted on the primary condition of his inheritance. So what does that mean? I asked. barely able to process the implications. "It means, my dear, that according to the legally binding terms of your grandfather's will, you are now the sole owner of Stewart Construction, and all associated assets valued at approximately $56 million. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. "That cannot be right. There must be some mistake." "No mistake!" Harold removed his glasses. William knew his son better than anyone. He specifically told me Thomas will show his true colors within a week, probably within a day. He was quite accurate in his prediction. But why not just leave everything to me directly, I wondered aloud. Your grandfather was a wise man who understood human nature. He wanted to give Thomas one final chance to do the right thing, to be the father he should have been all along. Harold's expression softened, but he also wanted to protect you, which is why he created this mechanism. Does Thomas know about this yet? Harold shook his head. No, and his reaction should be quite enlightening. Your father was too eager to count his millions to bother reading the document that granted them to him. A small laugh escaped him. In my 40 years of practicing law, I have rarely seen justice dispense itself so swiftly. The realization of what had happened began to sink in. My grandfather had not forgotten or abandoned me. Quite the opposite. He had created an ingenious test that my father had promptly failed. The house I had been evicted from this morning was now legally mine. The company that had always been just beyond my reach was now my responsibility. I do not know how to run a construction company, I said, panic edging into my voice. William considered that as well. Harold removed another document from his portfolio. This letter explains his wishes for your transition. He suggests retaining the current executive team while you learn the business with specific recommendations for mentors within the company. He was quite confident in your abilities, Jolene. Tears filled my eyes again, but these were different from the ones I had shared in the hotel room. These were tears of gratitude, of feeling seen and valued by the man who had raised me. There is more, Harold continued. William left video messages for both you and Thomas. He asked that they be viewed together with me present. I propose we schedule that meeting for tomorrow morning. Does it have to be together, I asked, dreading another confrontation with my father. Your grandfather was quite specific about that requirement. I believe he wanted Thomas to witness your reaction, and vice versa. Harold checked his calendar. Shall we say 10 a.m. tomorrow in the conference room here? I nodded, still overwhelmed by this reversal of fortune. In the meantime, Harold said, handing me a business card. This is the contact information for the estate security company. You may wish to have them meet you at the house later today. To do what? A smile crossed his weathered face to change the locks back. Of course. It is your house now, Jolene. As I left the law office, the world looked different somehow. The same streets I had driven in despair that morning now seemed full of possibility. I called Angela to cancel my stay, explaining briefly that circumstances had changed dramatically. Are you okay? She asked, concern evident in her voice. I think I will be, I replied honestly. For the first time in days, I think I will be. My next call was to the security company. They agreed to meet me at the house at 5 p.m. to change the locks and update the security system. The representative did not seem surprised by my request, making me wonder if Harold had already alerted them to the situation. I drove to the estate, slowly rehearsing what I would say if Thomas was still there. Part of me hoped he would be gone. Postpone our inevitable confrontation until the official meeting tomorrow. Another part wanted to witness his reaction when he learned how quickly his actions had cost him everything. As I pulled into the circular driveway, I noticed Thomas's sleek black Mercedes still parked by the front door. My stomach tightened with anxiety, but I forced myself to continue. This was my home now, not his. My grandfather had made that clear in the most definitive way possible. The security team arrived right on schedule. 3 uniformed officers in a company van. I met them at the entrance, explaining that ownership of the property had legally transferred to me and showing them the document Harold had provided as proof. We will need to inform the current occupant of the change in status, the lead officer explained professionally. I nodded. I understand. Thomas answered the door himself, his expression shifting from annoyance to shock when he saw me standing with the security team. What is the meaning of this? He demanded. The lead officer stepped forward. "Sir, we have been authorized to change the security protocols on this property at the request of the new legal owner, Miss Jolene Stewart." Thomas's face flushed red. "That is ridiculous. I am the owner of this property as of yesterday. I am afraid there has been a development with the will. Dad," I said, finding strength in the truth, "you might want to contact Harold Jenkins for clarification. There was a condition to your inheritance that you violated when you evicted me this morning." "What condition? What are you talking about?" His voice rose sharply. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside," I suggested. Aware of the security team witnessing this family drama, Thomas stepped back, allowing us to enter. The security team remained professionally distant, focusing on their technical tasks, while Thomas and I moved to the study. "Explain yourself," he demanded once the door closed behind us. "Grandfather's will stipulated that you had to provide for me, including letting me live here. By throwing me out, you violated the terms of the inheritance." I kept my voice calm, stating facts rather than accusations. Thomas's face went pale as the implications sank in. "That is impossible. Harold would have mentioned something that significant during the reading. It was in the full document which you did not bother to read," I replied. "We have a meeting with Harold tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss everything formally." For a moment, Thomas seemed to deflate before my eyes. Then his expression hardened. "This is some kind of trick. You and that old lawyer cooked this up together. The will was written and notarized months ago." I said grandfather knew exactly what would happen. He gave you a chance to do the right thing, and you failed within 24 hours. The security team leader knocked politely before entering. "Excuse me, Miss Stewart. The exterior locks have been changed. Where would you like the new keys delivered?" Thomas stared at the man, then back at me, the reality of the situation finally penetrating his denial. "This is my house," he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Not anymore." I said simply, "I will take the keys now. Thank you." As the security officer handed me the set of keys, I saw something I had never witnessed before. My father looking completely lost. The arrogance that had defined him throughout my life had vanished, replaced by the dawning understanding that he had outsmarted himself. "You cannot do this to me," he said, but it sounded more like a question than a statement. "I did not do this," I replied quietly. "You did." The next morning, I arrived at Harold's office 15 minutes early. My stomach twisted in knots. Despite legally having the upper hand, I still felt intimidated by the prospect of facing my father. Years of seeking his approval had conditioned me to shrink in his presence. "You look just like your mother," Harold observed as he escorted me to the conference room. She had the same quiet strength. The comparison bolstered my confidence. I rarely heard anyone speak of my mother, and the connection felt meaningful in this moment of confrontation. The conference room featured a large oak table with leather chairs and a wall-mounted screen. Harold had set up a laptop connected to a projector. "William recorded these messages just 2 months ago," he explained. He was quite specific about the viewing order. At precisely 10 a.m., Thomas strode in, accompanied by a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit. "This is Richard Dalton, my attorney," he announced without preamble. Harold nodded courteously. "Good morning, Counselor Dalton. I must inform you that this is not a negotiation or legal proceeding, but a family matter, as specified in William Stewart's will. Your presence is not prohibited, but it will not change the outcome of today's meeting." Thomas took a seat directly across from me, his expression a careful mask. Gone was the shock from yesterday, replaced by calculated composure. "Jolene, this misunderstanding can be resolved easily," he began. "I am prepared to allow you to stay in the guest house while we sort out a proper arrangement." "There is no misunderstanding," Harold interjected. The terms of the will were quite clear, and Thomas violated them within 1 day of the initial reading. "Before we discuss any potential arrangements, William requested that both of you view these messages." Harold dimmed the lights and started the first video. My grandfather's face appeared on screen, causing my throat to tighten with emotion. He was seated in his study, looking frailer than I remembered, but with the same clear-eyed intensity that had characterized him throughout his life. Thomas William began addressing his son directly. "If you are watching this, then you have done exactly what I predicted. You have shown Jolene the door, now that you believe you have secured your inheritance." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I have watched you chase wealth your entire life, believing it would bring you the satisfaction that has always eluded you. The company was never enough. The house was never enough. No amount of money filled the emptiness I saw in you. William paused, his expression softening slightly. I gave you one final test, son. One opportunity to demonstrate that family meant more to you than fortune. All you had to do was share your abundance with your daughter, the only child you will ever have. Instead, you showed her the same coldness you have displayed throughout her life. Thomas's attorneys scribbled notes furiously, while my father's face grew increasingly flushed. I built Stewart Construction from nothing. William continued. My hands bled laying the first foundations. I worked alongside every crew until my body would no longer allow it. I did not build this legacy for it to become a monument to greed. The room fell completely silent as William leaned closer to the camera. The company now belongs to Jolene, as does the house and all associated assets. This is not a punishment, Thomas. It is the natural consequence of your choices. You have always valued money above relationships. Now you have neither. The video ended, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Thomas stared at the blank screen, his expression unreadable. There is a message for Jolene as well, Harold said quietly, starting the second video. My grandfather appeared again, his expression much warmer this time. My dearest Jolene, he began, causing tears to immediately spring to my eyes. If you are watching this, then everything has happened as I anticipated. I am sorry for the pain Thomas has caused you, but not surprised by it. William smiled gently. You have shown me what true family means through your actions, not just your words. The way you cared for me in my final months was a gift I can never repay, but I can ensure your future is secure. He leaned forward, his eyes seemingly looking directly into mine. Stewart Construction is now yours. Do not be intimidated by this responsibility. You have a natural understanding of people that Thomas never possessed. The company needs your heart as much as your head. My grandfather held up a framed photo. I recognized a picture of my mother in me when I was about 5 years old. Sarah would be so proud of the woman you have become. Lead with compassion, Jolene, but never confuse it with weakness. You are stronger than you know. As the second video ended, I wiped tears from my cheeks. Thomas sat motionless, his attorney whispering urgently in his ear. Harold turned on the lights. There is one final portion to William's message, a letter addressed to both of you. He removed an envelope from his portfolio and broke the seal. William requested this be read aloud in your presence. The letter was brief but powerful. Thomas and Jolene. While the legal ownership of the company and assets now belongs solely to Jolene, I leave one path for reconciliation. If Thomas demonstrates genuine change and contributes meaningfully to the company over a period of no less than 2 years, Jolene may at her sole discretion consider sharing a portion of the ownership with him. This decision belongs entirely to Jolene and must come from authentic relationship, not obligation or manipulation. Harold folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. That concludes William's final communications. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Thomas's attorney whispered something else to him, but he waved the man silent. For the first time since I could remember, my father looked defeated. This cannot be legal, he finally said, but the conviction had drained from his voice. I assure you it is entirely legal, Harold replied. The conditions were clearly stated in the will. You chose not to read fully. My office has already filed the necessary paperwork to transfer all assets to Jolene, effective as of yesterday afternoon, when you violated the terms. Thomas turned to me, his expression morphing from anger to something resembling desperation. Jolene, be reasonable. I am your father. This company has been in my future for decades. You do not know the first thing about running a construction business. I can learn. I replied simply. Grandfather believed I could. I made a mistake yesterday. Thomas conceded, his tone shifting to one I had never heard from him before, almost pleading. I was overwhelmed with grief and not thinking clearly. We can work this out as a family. Family, I repeated the word, tasting bitter on my tongue. You have never treated me like family. Even when Mom was dying, you were distant. Grandfather raised me while you chased business deals. Yesterday was not a momentary lapse in judgment. It was consistent with how you have always treated me. Thomas leaned forward, switching tactics. I can change. I will show you. Let me move back into the guest house, and we can run the company together. Father and daughter, just as it should have been all along. His sudden transformation was so transparent that it might have been comical under different circumstances. The man who had coldly told me I was useless 24 hours earlier was now performing an impression of a caring father. I do not think that would be appropriate right now, I said carefully. I need time to understand the business and establish myself as the new owner without confusion about leadership. You are making a mistake, Thomas warned, a flash of his true nature breaking through the facade. The board respects me. The clients know me. They will not accept you. Harold intervened smoothly. Actually, I spoke with the executive board this morning. They have been informed of the transition and have expressed their full support for Jolene. William had discussed this contingency with each of them individually over the past year. This revelation seemed to shake Thomas more than anything else. He planned this all along. He hoped it would not be necessary, Harold corrected. But yes, he prepared thoroughly for every scenario. Thomas stood abruptly. This is not over. I will contest the will. You are welcome to try, Harold replied calmly. However, I should mention that William included a no contest clause. Any legal challenge automatically triggers a complete forfeiture of the provision, allowing you to potentially earn back a portion of the company through good faith efforts. My father's attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm. We should discuss options privately. Thomas. As they prepared to leave, I found my voice again. Dad, I said, using the term, despite how foreign it felt. Grandfather left you a path back if you want it. Not to control everything, but to be part of the legacy he built. That opportunity is real, but only if your change is real too. Thomas paused at the door, his back to me. For a moment, I thought he might respond with something genuine. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and walked out without another word. Harold waited until the door closed before speaking. That went about as expected. Your grandfather predicted Thomas would attempt to challenge the will before considering the path of reconciliation. Will he actually contest it, I asked. He may try, but he cannot win. William and I created an ironclad document, and Thomas's actions yesterday provided immediate and documented violation of the terms. Harold gathered his papers. Now shall we discuss your transition to company leadership? There is quite a bit to review as we move to Harold's office to begin planning my unexpected future. I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Sadness for what might have been with my father, gratitude for my grandfather's foresight, and something unexpected. A growing confidence that perhaps I was more prepared for this responsibility than I had initially believed. William had trusted me with his legacy. Now I needed to prove worthy of that trust. The weight of keys feels different when they represent not just a home, but a legacy. As I unlocked the front door of my grandfather's house, now legally mine, the familiar creak of the hinges welcomed me home. The first night alone in the sprawling estate was both comforting and disorienting. I slept in my childhood bedroom rather than claiming the master suite, needing the embrace of familiar surroundings. Morning brought a flood of calls and emails, most expressing congratulations on my new position as CEO of Stewart Construction. Some were genuine from employees who had known me since childhood. Others carried thinly veiled skepticism about my abilities. I saved them all, making mental notes of allies and potential challenges ahead. My first week as company owner was a crash course in construction management. I spent hours with department heads reviewing active projects and financial statements. Nights were dedicated to studying industry reports and the company history. William had built a solid organization with a strong executive team, making my learning curve less steep than it might have been. Thomas made his first attempt at reconciliation exactly 7 days after our meeting in Harold's office. He arrived unannounced at the house carrying an expensive bottle of wine and wearing an expression of practiced humility. I thought we might talk, he said when I answered the door. Father to daughter. I invited him into the living room, but did not open his wine. What do you want to discuss? I have been reflecting on William's message. He began perching uncomfortably on the edge of the sofa. Perhaps I have been too focused on the business aspects of life. Perhaps I echoed waiting for him to continue. I would like another chance, Thomas said, leaning forward earnestly to be the father I should have been to mentor you in running the company. His performance was almost convincing. The slight tightness around his eyes was the only tell that his words were tactical rather than heartfelt. I appreciate the offer. I replied carefully, but I think we need to establish trust before discussing any business arrangements. Perhaps we could start with regular family dinners, completely separate from company matters. Thomas's smile faltered slightly. Of course, though my expertise would be valuable during this transition period, the Jefferson contract alone requires delicate handling. And there it was, the true purpose of his visit revealed. The Jefferson contract was the company's largest current project, worth millions in revenue. The Jefferson situation is being handled, I assured him. I met with Robert Jefferson yesterday. We have restructured the timeline to accommodate their budget adjustments. Thomas could not hide his surprise. You met with Bob personally. He rarely takes meetings with anyone below executive level. Apparently, he made an exception for William's granddaughter. I did not mention that the meeting had gone exceptionally well, with Jefferson expressing relief at dealing with someone who valued relationships over immediate profit margins. Our conversation continued in this vein with Thomas, making overtures of family connection that inevitably circled back to business advantages. After an hour, he left with promises to call soon about that family dinner. We both knew he would not. Over the following weeks, Thomas tried different approaches. Sometimes he appeared vulnerable, alluding to health concerns or loneliness. Other times, he arrived with business contacts in tow, attempting to leverage their presence into access to company operations. Once he even brought old family photos, a transparent attempt to manipulate my emotions. Each visit followed the same pattern. Initial warmth followed by increasingly obvious attempts to regain control of the company. Each time I maintained boundaries while leaving the door open for genuine relationship as my grandfather had wished. Meanwhile, I was finding my footing at Stewart Construction. My background in marketing proved unexpectedly valuable as we expanded our digital presence and modernized our client communications. The executive team, once wary, began bringing problems to me, directly finding that my perspective often offered fresh solutions. 3 months after inheriting the company, I made my first major decision, establishing the William Stewart Foundation, dedicated to providing trade education for underprivileged youth. The foundation would create pathways into construction careers while honoring my grandfather's belief in opportunity for all. The announcement garnered positive press and industry attention. Thomas appeared at the launch event uninvited, positioning himself near me during photo opportunities as if he had been involved in the planning. I did not correct reporters who assumed he was supporting the initiative, choosing to focus on the foundation's mission rather than family politics. That evening, as the event wound down, Thomas approached me at the bar. "Clever move with the foundation," he said, signaling for a scotch. "Good publicity." "It is not about publicity," I corrected. "It is about honoring grandfather's values." Thomas studied me over the rim of his glass. "You really believe that, do not you? That business can be about more than profit?" "I do." I met his gaze steadily, and so did grandfather. Something shifted in Thomas's expression, then a flicker of recognition that perhaps he had fundamentally misunderstood something important about William's legacy. "He left you more than the company did not. Thomas said quietly. "He left you his perspective." It was the most genuine thing my father had said since the inheritance transfer. For a moment, I glimpsed the possibility of what our relationship could have been under different circumstances. "Yes," I acknowledged, "and that is worth more than the $56 million. Thomas nodded slowly, finished his drink in silence, and left without his usual pitch for involvement in the business. It would be 3 weeks before I heard from him again. During those weeks, I made another significant decision. After much consideration, I established a modest trust fund for Thomas, providing him a comfortable living without control over company assets. Harold advised against it legally, but supported me personally. "Your grandfather would approve of your compassion," the elderly lawyer told me. "Just be careful. It is not mistaken for weakness." When Thomas learned of the trust, his reaction surprised me, rather than viewing it as an opening to negotiate for more. He accepted it with quiet dignity. Our next meeting carried a different tone, less calculating and more reflective. Gradually, over the following months, something resembling a genuine relationship began to form between us. It was fragile and often awkward, built on tentative conversations about neutral topics. Thomas spoke about his own childhood for the first time, revealing complexities in his relationship with William that I had never considered. 1 year after inheriting Stewart Construction, I invited Thomas to join a newly formed advisory board along with industry experts and community leaders. The position carried prestige but limited authority, a step toward inclusion without compromising the company's direction. "Thank you for this opportunity," he said when I extended the offer. "I will not disappoint you." "I hope not," I replied honestly. "Grandfather wanted you to have a path back. This is part of that path. The healing between us remained incomplete. Perhaps always would. Some wounds leave permanent scars. But the journey from that cruel dismissal on the day after the funeral to our current cautious collaboration represented growth neither of us had thought possible." As for Stewart Construction, the company flourished under my leadership. We maintained the core values William had established while expanding into sustainable building practices and community development projects. The William Stewart Foundation grew to support dozens of students each year, creating a pipeline of talented, dedicated workers who brought fresh energy to the industry. The most profound change, however, was within me. The girl who had desperately sought her father's approval had become a woman secure in her own judgment. The uncertainty I felt upon inheriting the company had transformed into quiet confidence. I honored my grandfather's legacy not by preserving it unchanged, but by evolving it thoughtfully. 2 years to the day after William's death, I visited his grave alone. The simple headstone bore his name and the dates of his life, along with the words he had chosen. "True wealth is measured in lives touched, not dollars earned." "You were right about so many things," I told him, placing fresh roses beside the stone about the company, about Dad, about me. The autumn breeze rustled through nearby trees, scattering golden leaves across the cemetery grounds. In that peaceful moment, I felt a profound gratitude for my grandfather's final lesson, perhaps his most important one. That true family is defined by love and respect, not merely by blood or legal documents. The inheritance he left me was far more than money or property. It was the understanding that how we treat others reveals our true character. It was the courage to stand firm in my values, even when faced with manipulation or rejection. And it was the wisdom to recognize that forgiveness does not require forgetting, but it does allow for new beginnings. As I drove back to the house that was now truly my home, I reflected on how quickly life can change in just 24 hours. I had gone from homeless to the owner of a $56 million company, but the real transformation had taken longer and reached deeper than any legal transfer of assets. I had learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters, and that lesson was the greatest inheritance of all. I hope this story resonated with you in some way. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone underestimated you only to regret it later? Or perhaps you have had a family member who taught you important life lessons through their actions, rather than just their words. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if it touched your heart. I'm grateful for each of you taking the time to listen to my journey, and I look forward to connecting through your stories as well.